Typical apologetics nonsense. Welcome back. Today we're still talking about the resurrection, not so much the empty tomb and all the facts surrounding that. Today we're focusing on the appearances of Jesus, and we're actually going to start off with an objection to the appearances. More so, the objection comes from that Jesus appeared, he just only appeared spiritually, that he did not appear in his physical body. But real quick, if you're new, my name is Daniel Ray. I'm a personal trainer. I'm a Christian. I lived with an atheist for a year, so I got into apologetics because I had no idea how to defend my faith. I'm definitely still learning. You're here. Now you're learning. We're learning together. Let's get into it. The objection around Jesus appearing in his physical body, that he only appeared to the people spiritually, comes from Mr. Robert Funk. He's the founder of the Jesus Seminar, and he attempts to make the claim about appearances of Jesus to be a later tradition or legend that arose out of the Christian narrative many years after the founding of Christianity. One of the reasons he believes this is because the claims about Jesus being buried in a tomb that the women knew about has recently come under scholarly suspicion, and in addition, the tendency to elaborate and enhance the burial stories only heightens that suspicion. So Mr. Funk believes Jesus resurrected only spiritually, but that his body decayed in the tomb just like everyone else's. What he actually believes happened was that a Christophany developed out of an angelophany. If you're not familiar with this term, an angelophany is an appearance or encounter with an angel. So basically what he's saying is that Jesus appeared to the people in angel form after he died. And he even has some scripture that he can point to back up his claims. He can point to Stephen when he was being stoned in Acts, and he looks up and he beheld Jesus standing on the right hand of the Father. And you have Acts or Paul on his road to Damascus with his conversion experience. You know, he hears Jesus talking to him. Why does thou kick against the stick? Response to these claims about Jesus appearing to people as an angel. So Sean points to, first of all, the appearances to Stephen and Paul were post-ascension. So Jesus was resurrected on the third day. He appeared to like 12 different people and groups of people. And after that, it ends with him ascending into the sky on a cloud. And so the appearances to Stephen and Paul were after that. And what Sean is saying is that the appearances, the reason Jesus appeared to them in the sky could be explained because of that. They were post-ascension. Secondly, Luke is most definitely interpreting the appearances in the Gospel of Luke as being physically and bodily. Point to Luke chapter 2, verse 4, Jesus' tomb is empty on Easter morning. Luke 24, behold my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. He literally says right here, handle me and see, for a spirit hath not flesh and bones. In Luke 24 again, and they gave him a piece of broiled fish and honeycomb, and he ate. Doesn't sound like much of a spirit to me. And then in Acts 13, it says, talking about David, and that he fell asleep in his own generation, that he was buried with his ancestors, and his body decayed, and the one whom God raised from the dead did not see decay. So Sean goes on to say that anyone appealing to the Acts, those specific verses Mr. Robert Funk was talking about with Stephen and Paul, anyone appealing to those that scripture to support his claims, you also have to look at the actual book of Luke, because Luke wrote both the book of Luke and Acts. And in order to make those claims, you have to have Luke contradicting himself, because it's very easy to see that Luke in the Gospel of Luke is talking about a physical bodily resurrection, and it's not necessary. You don't have to do that when Luke is very clear of what he's trying to convey, and it doesn't require any jumping through of hoops. Finally, with the book of Luke, he is very careful. If you observe Luke's writings, he is very careful about accuracy. He really cares about the details. In Luke chapter 1:3, he writes about having or wanting to have a perfect understanding. In Luke 1:8, talks about wanting to have or wanting to convey certainty to his writers. And in another verse, he talks about consulting with eyewitnesses, wanting to put things in order just the way that they happened. Now, I know there are some more objections to the appearances of Jesus and responses to that. That's just a little snippet of what we could cover. But next, we're going to get into the the appearance claims of Jesus, and are they historical in nature? Into the appearance narratives, and are the appearance narratives that we see in the Bible, are they is it evidence for the historicity? Is there evidence for the historicity of the claims? So number one, we have 1 Corinthians chapter 15, which is a testimony by Paul, and Paul himself that he saw the resurrected Christ and understands the resurrection of Jesus as a bodily resurrection. And it's very important because this is like one of the earliest creedal statements that we have, making the claim about the resurrection. It's like 30, 35, 37, 80. I could be wrong on that, but that's just a couple of years after the resurrection of Jesus. So this would have been someone that was right there, been able to talk to, literal eyewitnesses that lived during that time period. So very early. Second, the women were first to see the risen Christ. So the reason that's important is for the same reason that it's important that the women were first to discover the empty tomb. First century Jewish culture, a woman's testimony was not considered binding in court. A woman's status was inferior to that of a man's. So unless they, a woman's testimony was not considered as reliable as a man. So unless the writers are playing some type of 4D chess reverse psychology type thing, there's no reason that they would include that unless it's the way that it happened and it's the truth, because who would lie to make their claims not look as valid? Now this one's a big one. So Sean points to the early primitive phrases such as the 12 and Cephas. So now if you're not familiar with these phrases, or maybe you are, you just don't really know what they are or what they mean, I was in the same boat, so let's break it down. The 12 refers to the 12 apostles. So these are Jesus' closest followers, and even though after Judas betrays him in his subsequent death, the group's reduced down to 11. But by using the term the 12, Paul indicates that his testimony and that of others is grounded in first-hand eyewitness accounts of the resurrection. And the early simple designation shows that the resurrection claims come from the very first generation of believers. And furthermore, Paul's writings are among the earliest documents. We talked about that just a second ago, dating from around like AD 35 to 37. So they're very close to the events of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. And if the resurrection had been, this is big, so if the resurrection had been a later legendary development, you would expect the terminology to have evolved over time rather than retaining the original straightforward term, the 12. Name Cephas. So Cephas is Aramaic for Peter. And by using the Aramaic term instead of the Greek term Petros, which is Greek for Peter, it indicates that the testimony originated from the early, predominantly Aramaic-speaking community of Jesus' followers. And this supports the argument that the resurrection accounts come from an original eyewitness tradition. Again, so since Peter was an eyewitness to the life of Jesus, employing his Aramaic name not only lends credibility to Paul's writings, but it also demonstrates how soon after Jesus' life the accounts were recorded. And the preservation of the original language, of the Aramaic language, underscores the early authentic nature of the testimonies, reinforcing the historical reliability of the resurrection narrative. All to say that by using the term the 12 and Cephas, it shows that the historicity of Jesus' life was established very early and not something that was evolved over time into an exaggerated legend. Fourth, so Sean argues that the accounts of Jesus after his resurrection are both brief, they're difficult to harmonize, and sporadic. And so he sees this as significant because if the early Christians had simply invented the stories, you'd expect them to produce a neatly consistent narrative, one without confusing differences or missing details. Instead, when you look at the gospel accounts, you see they're plain, they're unpolished. There's no obvious attempt to embellish or exaggerate anything, or make every little minor detail fit very neatly into one cohesive argument, which suggests that they're more likely authentic. They're more in alignment with something that you would see as an actual testimony instead of something that was made up. Now here's one that kind of doesn't really make sense to me. Sean argues the resurrection appearances are extremely reserved. So when compared to the apocryphal gospels, which they believe in a form of dualism, that the spirit is the only thing that we can save, but the matter is inherently evil, and so Jesus rose only spiritually. So when you're comparing the synoptic gospel narratives of the resurrection to the apocryphal gospel narratives, which is dated to about the 2nd century, so way after the original gospels, you see some huge differences. In the apocryphal gospels, you have a very detailed explanation, and Sean argues very gross details at that. The thing that gets me though here is at the end of the day, we're claiming that Jesus rose from the dead. That's a very bold statement. It's completely the opposite of reserved, and we're the only religion that really claims resurrection. So no matter how you spin it, it's a pretty bold testimony. Finally, this one did make a lot of sense to me. So in the narratives, the disciples are slow to understand or believe what's happening. They don't really know what's going on half the time. We're talking about the early leaders of the church, the ones people are going to look to for, guidance. And here they are not really looking like A-grade students. And it's kind of cast them in a negative light. And you'd think that would be counterproductive to their authority or their ministries. But at the very least, the fact that they're willing to display their inadequacies, it shows that they're probably telling truth, because let's be honest, who lies to make themselves look bad? A little story that took place in November 1923. Adolf Hitler, he attempted to overthrow the German government in Munich. He had a bold coup, a coup later known as the Beer Hall Putsch, on November 8th. He and his followers, they seized control of a beer hall where Bavarian officials were gathered, and after a little while, some things happened, some things took place. Hitler and his band of followers, they decided to march through the city the next day, hoping to spark a nationwide uprising. However, the plan quickly fell apart when they were confronted by armed police officers. Shots would ring out, and in the midst of the chaos, Hitler would narrowly dodge a bullet after his associate jumps in front of it to save Hitler, and in the process of that, dragging Hitler to the ground and dislocating his shoulder. Now, far from taking the last stand that he would have you believe, he actually would take off running. Him and his associate, they would take off running away from the fight. They would hide out for a couple of days at one of his friend's house, where he would eventually be picked up and arrested and thrown in jail. Now, when Hitler, on his rise to power, he would actually write his famous book, you probably heard of it, Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. And in his book, he would write about the failed revolution, the failed coup, and he would transform the narrative into a legendary moment of heroic leadership, portraying himself as a brave revolutionary who stood firm against overwhelming odds. A very stark contrast to the reality of his hasty retreat and the putsch's swift collapse. But here's the deal. What he's doing right here is actually is expected. He's lying to make himself look good. Now, when you look at the gospel writers, why would they lie to make themselves look bad? Now, does this make it absolutely true? No, not at all. But it is a point that it is a point for it being more reliable. But anyways, guys, that's it. I hope you guys got some value out of it. If you made it this far, please comment down below. You're learning from me. I know I can learn from you. If you have something to add, comment in the comment section. But I'll see you guys next time.